So welcome, Lola Leving, who's here with me in Toronto, but we're not together.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Um, so why don't you say a few words about who you are to start?
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Lola. Like you said, thanks for having me. I am a PhD student in clinical and counseling psychology at the University of Toronto, and both a focusing practitioner and also a researcher and a clinician. So a couple hats.
Great. And tell us a little bit about how you found focusing. What was your journey to the focusing bit?
Yeah, for sure. So um, back in my undergrad, I used to do research on the perception of sensations. So in a neuroscience lab, I worked in a dungeon and was doing a lot of work about, the interneurons and the visual system of animal models. And I was always really interested of how we experienced the world, and that was sort of like the idea of going to visual lab. It's like, how do we what do we see or hear, our perception? And then I was introduced to mindfulness from a young age, and I was always really aware of the connection to my body and also the information that I receive from my body. And I ended up going into more clinical route. So my academic journey took me to clinical psychology, and I was really interested in how different people, clients in the clinical setting, um, gain information about their surroundings and their senses and their experiences. And so I actually just had the focusing original manual, Gendlin's copy kind of floated through by my desk, and it really stuck with me. Like it was exactly all the things that I was thinking about and questioning, but just sort of in like a small 100-page book. And I picked up the practice for myself and actually did a course with you, and that's how kind of all of this unfolded and inspired more research on the topic.
Yeah. So then you pursued it in your research, and you're here today to tell us about a paper. So
Hmm.
explore that
Yeah.
other things. So go, how about we'll start with the overview of the
Yeah,
paper.
yeah. Sounds good. Yeah.
Hmm.
So this is, and I'll just read the title.
Yeah.
It's a paper called "The Capacities Required to Engage in Focusing, Determining the Role of Focusing Attitude, Interoception, and Symbolization." And this was really like an exploratory pilot study based on my master's research. And really, I was interested in investigating the individual differences in these three foundational capacities that are sort of theorized to support focusing process, focusing engagement. So I can get into all of them in more detail, but just in brief, focusing attitude is this uh, openness, that kind of friendly stance that we talk about and teach towards our felt sense or our experience. Interception, in short, is really just bodily awareness, like our perceptions of hunger and if we're hot, if we're cold. And symbolization, I mean, that's a word I think most of us kind of intuit through words, images, symbolizing our experience. Yeah. So I can share kind of briefly the rationale. I shared a little bit already, but the kind of why behind the study was uh, it became really clear to me as I was talking to people, either practitioners focusing or just kind of other people and clients, that although there was a lot of like manuals and training programs and guidelines, there seemed to be this like clear gap. Like some people just kind of get it. And I'm sure in your teaching experiences, there's people who just like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
they're doing it.
We call them natural focusers.
Yes, exactly. And then there's people who kind of don't quite get it, or like it's hard for that process to click. Um, there's some research Akira Kemi does research on like focusing or focusing alpha, focusing beta. So that idea exists. But I was really curious if there's these kind of like underlying capacities, these things that kind of support people who might be natural focusers and those who aren't. So that's how this came to be. And these three facets kind of seemed most applicable through kind of what was happening in existing research and also through my own experience. Um, and also an opportunity to provide research in this field. There's limited empirical research because it's really hard to fit this sort of like experiential experience into this, empirical box. So there's a couple different things that we wanted to do there.
Beautiful
Mm-hmm.
overview. So we're going to dive in first with the focusing attitude, and you're going to tell us
Yeah.
more about what it is, and then also what your research found.
Yeah. So the study itself, before I get into focusing attitude, just so
Okay.
folks know, we had 62 participants and they completed different questionnaires. And then out of those 62 participants, 38 also completed a 15-minute focusing session where they themselves focused. Everyone had experience with focusing, so we weren't teaching anyone, we were just collecting that data. And then those focusing sessions were rated using the experiencing scale, which I can talk a little bit more about too. And then I think what was really important for me was to have a mixed method study here. So that means that we were collecting like the questionnaire quantitative data, but also qualitative data from participants' responses. So they would share like written responses. And I think that was really just for us to get a better understanding, like with focusers' own voices and their language of like what they were experiencing.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I guess before I get into focusing attitude, any clarification or questions about that or anything that might be helpful for listeners?
Well, maybe since you mentioned the experiencing scale, we should.
Yeah, okay, for sure. Yeah. So I can talk about it in terms of the context of the findings, but just as an overview, the experiencing scale is a process measure. So it's has 7 levels of experiencing. The lowest level is 1, and that really is like people just kind of talking about day-to-day things like the weather or the news. So they're not really referring to their inner experience. And then if you zoom kind of all the way up to levels 5, 6, 7, that's where you get the more kind of focused voice. And that's when people start referring to their inner experience. So they might say things like, oh, I get the sense that maybe that connected with that, or maybe that's related to this memory. And so all of a sudden, if we kind of think of like the early levels and experiences, sort of like an outward, um, uh, tone or experience, the higher levels are sort of like an inward directed referencing. So, so that's what we use to apply to these focusing sessions. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Okay, cool. So I'll turn to focusing attitude. Like I said at the beginning, it's really involves like awareness and acceptance of the focusing of the felt sense, but also having an appropriate distance to the felt sense. So not feeling too overwhelmed, but not being too far from it. And the construct comes from some research done in Japan. There's various researchers looking at that, but there's still some limited research about how that actually connects to the focusing process itself. So in our study, we found that most participants reported a really high level of focusing attitudes. So they were able to bring awareness to their felt sense and find appropriate distance from it, act in accordance with it. And we also found that the greater the focusing attitude, the greater the engagement with focusing, which pretty intuitive finding. Um, I thought what was also interesting and kind of added richness to some of these findings was that the qualitative pieces where people spoke to how focusing really enhanced a connection between themselves and others. If there's participants saying things like, that it enhanced their capacity to be with themselves and to be with others, and things like healing and personal growth and well-being. So yeah, so that was pretty intuitive, but I think interesting to see kind of as a finding. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Something what you said there was making me think of step six, welcoming. Those two things seem very similar to me.
Hmm.
Teach them together. What was there anything with that in your findings?
Yeah, definitely. So that receiving step, right? So I think that that really relates, like if we're able to receive what the body gave us, and kind of that information. But also, and maybe you find this in teaching beginners, sometimes we can't even begin finding a felt sense because we're not in the space of feeling like non-judgmental or open enough to even start the process. So I think it's kind of like the top and the bottom of that experience of actually just being able to sit with and welcome and allow for experiences to emerge. Yeah.
Hard energy. You would have
Yes.
done some of that with me.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
creates that open space, which can
Exactly.
well, yeah.
And I think you're onto, I think one of the kind of general outcomes or the kind of the takeaways from the study is like, okay, well, if you see that there's a person who is really low on focusing attitude or seems really resistant or self-critical, then that's that's one of the very core facets that needs to be enhanced maybe before we get into all the different steps, right? So I think a lot of people do this intuitively anyways, but then kind of having it in data is, I think, pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have any specific examples connected to the focusing attitude you want to share?
Uh, might come later on. I think
Okay.
I can't, yeah, I don't think I have any like specific pieces about this one. Yeah.
Can edit that.
Okay.
All right. Shall we move on to interoception?
Yeah, yeah, sounds
Yeah.
good. Yeah. So interception, like I said before, is really that body awareness piece. So it's the collective processing of sensory information. So it's just our ability to read the signals from internal states. So feeling your heartbeat, that's interoception. Feeling hunger, it's interoception. And there's a lot of really interesting research in mental health literature that kind of says that sometimes when interoception is out of whack, either, the signals are too loud or too quiet. There's a whole host of different things that can cause impairment. And in focusing, I mean, to feel or sense a bodily felt sense, there's the idea is that we need some capacity to receive information from the body. And in our study, we found that greater interceptive capacity was associated with greater focusing engagement, and also with focusing attitude. So that's also interesting how the different pieces connect. So having the ability to kind of sense into your body also gives you this kind of capacity of being welcoming, perhaps to what's coming up. So the kind of interrelation pieces are also interesting. And
Why do you
again,
think that
sorry,
is?
go ahead.
I was going to say, why do you think that is that those two connect?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. Um, Part of the ways that we measure interception, like in our study, the questionnaire that measured it has some pieces that kind of speak to the fact like, do I listen to myself? Like when I'm hungry, do I go and eat?
Yeah.
Right. So you can kind of see how that could connect to something like a focusing attitude because there's a bit of a listening to the body, and also maybe the sort of trusting, okay, that means I'm hungry, so I'm gonna go eat. So there's a couple different ways that that could connect. It might be that different measures of interception. So there's researchers who use things like heart monitoring tasks. So they actually check the heartbeat. So they'll measure like objectively the heartbeat and then have people in tune how many uh, uh, how many times the heart beat. So it might be that kind of those more like objective measures might not align so much, um, but yeah, I think it feels like there would be something there, right? Just because of our ability to listen and welcome and kind of open to something. To,
Yeah. Certainly the heart does some of that work, and it's in the body.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, intuitively, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then interception, I think, again, kind of interestingly enough, like people weren't primed to this in the questions and the kind of thematic responses, but people spoke to the fact that it really helps them attune to their bodies and to their sense of self again. Someone spoke, about focusing and helping them gain internal coherence or like immerse themselves in the flow of life. Um, and live in presence. So all of these kinds of themes came out in the idea of like, okay, right, like I'm actually inhabiting this body, and so I'm receiving information with it. So yeah, also kind of makes sense. Hmm. Yeah, and I can move on to symbolization, I think. Um, yeah, so symbolization refers to the representation of the felt experience, and we can do that through language, gesture, imagery, and yeah, and other ways, but that's kind of the core pieces. And if we think about the focusing process, especially using kind of like Gendlin language, it's really about rendering this implicit bodily experience into something that is explicit and workable and tangible. And obviously, this relates really closely to the handle step, so being able to kind of grasp something. Um, and then within symbolization, we were particularly interested in visual symbolization or visual imagery as
Right.
one of the forms of symbolization. Um, and I mean, this came from personal experience. I'm quite a visual person. So that was like immediately when I started focusing, that was something that really helped me. But there was also people that I spoke to that were like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I never see pictures in my head when I focus, or like that's not something I do at all. And there's a story, or I mean, this article that actually Gendlin and one of his students, Linda Olson, wrote in the 1970s. And I just thought it was really interesting because Gendlin actually kind of downplayed the role of images in the original manual and in his writing. So he writes this sort of like um, this paper saying like, hey, we ignored this special power that images hold. So like kind of I'm writing here to say that like, yes, images can have a role in focusing, but and kind of warns everyone that just like everything else, it has to come from the felt sense. It has to emerge from the felt sense. So we can't
Yeah,
kind of impose images on the experience.
that's
Um,
very interesting because he has another paper where he talks about the importance of movement.
mm,
Well, that's another way of symbolizing, right? Like gesture.
yes.
But I'm also thinking about aphantasia, right? The ability to visualize, or not everybody can visualize. Early in his career, he worked with Carl Rogers, and they worked with people with schizophrenia. And those people, I understand, can be highly visual. Like they lose track of what is reality and not reality. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, anything to say about any of that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there's so many different ways to symbolize, and I think, for people who focus, you can see that, often, and one of the things that really interests me is like when you're focusing, you might get that gesture, right? And that gesture first comes, and you're like, oh, what is this? It's something, and then it's like, okay, I don't know, with the rolling, or there's a moving, so often our gestures kind of come first, and sometimes images also come first.
Yeah.
So in that paper, and I can share that with you, share with the listeners as well. But there's an idea that he brings up that okay, well maybe images or gestures or words kind of come at different points of the focusing process. So maybe we start with an image, but then in order to get a shift, we might need to put a word to it, or maybe the gestures kind of even come before those things. So trying to almost map out how different forms of symbolization actually align with different parts of the focusing process. But then also, I think to your point, obviously there's people who don't symbolize in certain ways. And by no means does it mean that we have to symbolize in certain ways to get this focusing experience. But I think for me, it was interesting that I sort of had this experience of like, oh, of course, visualization is part of it, and then learning that for some people it was not part of it at all, and for others, just kind of the diversity of the experience, but also uh, yeah, kind of how this is part of the process.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. So we'll come back to what your paper found, but I just would raise that the experiencing scale 2, which I don't know if you've looked at the simplified one, the 4.1.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
say level 3 is imagery, and level 4 is
Mm-hmm.
when you can explain it or have it explicate, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
So another data point pointing to this movement that it can come a certain way first and then
Yeah.
stabilize further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's really cool. Yeah.
Okay, so what did you find on
Yeah.
civilization and visualization?
Yeah, so this was sort of the most, I think, surprising findings in some ways. So we had kind of thrown in this vividness of a visual imagery scale as like, it was like just something that I was thinking about. And I was like, okay, it's not that long. Like, let's just throw it in. Let's see what happens. And we found that it was very much associated with self-reported focusing engagement. So people were engaging. And then when we ran like our linear regression models, we actually found that this visualization or visual imagery was the strongest predictor of focusing. Um, so it really came
Again.
through. Sorry?
So I was like, say that again. That's really
Yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah. So visual imagery, so the capacity to yeah, vividly visualize significantly predicted focusing engagement. So that means that people with higher visual imagery had lower post-focusing checklist scores, which really means that they were engaging in the focusing process in a way that we would expect. So basically, higher visual imagery means greater capacity to focus, at least in the way that the measures that we were using. And in this way, again, I just want to caveat that this does not mean by any means that people can't focus
Yeah.
without images. But there's some sort of something that's happening where I think the ability to vividly visualize gives people maybe like again in Gendlin's paper, he actually says that special power, that superpower. Like there's like a little boost that happens where it seems to help people with this process. It's not necessary, but it could be helpful.
Yeah. So they're correlated,
Exactly. Yeah.
not
Yeah.
causal.
Yes, no
Yeah.
causation in the study at all because it was a cross-sectional study, so not longitudinal, which means that we didn't track people over time, something important to do in future. But yeah, and then also visual imagery was also positively predicted focusing attitude. So again, that initial attitude piece and interoception. So kind of this entangled picture where like they're all kind of related and they all have this, higher visual imagery is related to higher interoception, which is related to higher focusing attitude. So in a way, again, kind of intuitive, but you can see how these three capacities kind of come together, work together. And I think also noticing that, okay, if there's someone who's not a visual person, like, what are the other pieces that are at play here?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then another kind of piece that came through, which I thought was also interesting, is this idea of alexithymia, which is a clinical construct. And it's characterized by the difficulty identifying, differentiating, and yeah, describing and also processing one's emotions or feelings. And this is something that's kind of yeah, it's a little bit contentious in clinical literature, but there's some research on this. And the reason that we included it in the study because it relates to this idea of symbolization, because that identifying or describing emotions, all of those are facets of like, if you're able to do that, then you're able to symbolize your emotional experience. And so we found that higher alexithymia was linked to reduced focusing engagement. So you can kind of see see. So if people had greater difficulty identifying or describing emotions, then they had a harder time focusing, which also kind of makes sense. So yeah, that was interesting to see. And yeah, let's see if there's anything else that was yeah, and I guess maybe the qualitative piece for that too, just I again, not something that we prompted or asked folks, but there was a few people who also spoke about their the role of imagery and visualization in focusing, and how sometimes people use this with dream work, and Gendlin has some papers on dream work and kind of how that intersects. So another kind of interesting thing that's yeah, I think maybe due for more exploration
Okay, great. Do you have an example?
of things people said.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
of your own even experience symbolizing that kind of connects some of this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I was just actually speaking to my supervisor, and one of the things that we were talking about how sometimes obviously within focusing you can experience like a stuck process or like a and sometimes one focusing session is enough to kind of create that shift or the movement
Yeah.
and how for me I'll often kind of like bookmark through a visual like an image and kind of save that image or that felt sense kind of the handles and the image and how the images can be just yes, I mean, people say a picture's worth 100 words or 1,000 words, right? So there's something that sometimes, like, just having that can be so rich and so deep for the process. Yeah, I don't know if that connects.
Really? Yeah, because it's like, oh, you have like a tension in your neck. Well, what kind of tension is it? But I've had like
Yes.
the feeling like of a cat holding me or something that feel like there's something big is protecting me versus, a cross on my neck or something. I grew up
Yeah.
that can feel like a weight, like that, like they're maybe they feel similar physiologically, physically, but the imagery makes it has a quite a different
Yeah, 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 definitely. And the use of metaphor there for sure is like again, it's so rich. And I think, with teaching people to focus, it's like also giving them the freedom to say kind of wacky things and symbolize in truly whatever way feels most like resonates most with that felt experience, whether it's an image or a
yeah.
metaphor, or just that gesture, like whatever it is, or sounds. I don't know, like I love the old Gendlin videos because there's so many times where he's like, I don't know, it's like a and he'll just kind of blur, or say sounds or like something, and it's like that is symbolizing, right? That's symbolizing the experience, which I think is yeah, kind of a freeing thought.
And then I've had symbols change over time. Like
Yes.
the one that comes to mind is I had a shield in my chest,
Mm,
and then it turned into a Kevlar vest, which I could open and close. I could turn it on, I could put it on, take it off. Whereas the shield felt like it was like embedded in my body. It was like
yeah.
permanent.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's yeah, beautiful. Yeah. I have this sort of like almost like a reoccurring image or like this sense of like there's like something in like almost like a laterally like a
Mm,
in my body and also like the image of this material was like a really dense material and then in one focusing session the shift that occurred was that I realized it was pliable and all of a sudden there's this shift and this felt
yeah.
shift and then
Yeah.
movement. It's exactly what you described. It's like
Yeah.
you know, yeah, that carrying forward through
Yeah.
images and allowing the felt sense to emerge. And yeah, it's a really cool thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying like it can change, the material changes or the color changes or the shape,
Yeah.
many things can change and then
Yeah, exactly.
different.
Um, yeah, 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 definitely. And again, Jenlin's point of like that change coming from the organism, like the bottom up, because there's some practices like, you know, you can kind of go the other way where there's clinical practice where it's like, okay, well, there's that shield. Now picture yourself opening that shield, right? Or
Mm,
like, can you then can you set it aside, right? And sometimes we do that with clearing a space of like, okay, there's that thing, and like, can you visualize putting it out of you, right? So that's kind of more
yeah,
of like a manipulation top down.
yeah,
But there's something so powerful when that shift comes from inside of like that image then just changes for you, or there's something, so.
yeah. Or Jenlin's question, what would it feel like if this was all resolved? And then the body shows you, and then you get an image of that.
Yes. Yeah. The probing kind of pieces for sure.
And the
Yes.
self sense changes, and then your symbol changes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else on symbolization, or shall we go to the
Um, I think, yeah, I think that's a good place. Yeah.
yeah. So we were saying maybe there's a couple other findings you might want to
Yeah,
for us
definitely.
from the
I
paper.
think, sorry.
Yeah, just any other highlights from the paper.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think there's two other findings that I genuinely just think are super cool. The first one is related to the experiencing scale, which I introduced earlier on, but the idea was that when we actually rated these focusing sessions, we found that almost all of the sessions reached this peak of level 6, and this is both peak and mode ratings. Of level 5 and 6, which, if you remember, that scale is 1 to 7, so it's pretty high. And we had no sessions rated below level 4 or at level 7.
Yeah,
So it was really just these levels 4, 5, and 6, mostly 5 and 6. So I think there was like 92% at level peak level 6, so pretty high. And the reason that that's so notable is because there's been research where they apply this experiencing scale on therapy sessions. And therapy sessions typically operate at a level like 2 to 4. There are peaks of 5 and 6 and 7, but typically it's kind of 2 to 4. But
yeah,
what was so interesting is that across the board, like with all these different practitioners, focusing really came out as a really distinct process. Like it's a process that really operates at this level 5 or 6.
yeah,
And then that's something that's consistent. Um, and so it speaks to partially this idea that like Gendlin, this is what he was saying this whole time, right? Like it's
yeah,
focusing, like it's not necessarily something you have to do 24/7. It's a mode of operation. Like it's something you
yeah,
get into, you're kind of at this level, and you can enter and sustain this experiencing process, allow this carrying forward of the stuck or
yeah.
whatever, and then and then you can come out of it, right? Um, I
I
think
love that you just use the word process because it's like, his major work is like the process. Like,
exactly. Yes, exactly. The kind of moving through, right? Um, yeah, and I mean, I also do therapy, and like as a clinician, I've heard people come in, or like just even like in my own life, people are like, I don't want to go to therapy. I don't want to just like talk all this stuff through. Like I can ruminate by myself. Like I don't need to kind of, hash all this stuff up again and again and again.
yeah,
And I think it just speaks to something that's so true and focusing, and the organism's ability to process. It's that like that's the inner stance that seems to be required. Like that's
yeah,
the thing that creates the shift. And it's actually often leaving the story behind, leaving this kind of level 2 4 of like what the context, and coming into this like more of, or what all of this is about, kind of those big questions that um, allow, again, the organism to do its own processing.
yeah,
Not saying that context isn't important, story is important, we're creatures of narrative, so it's important to have that. But I think coming to this finding, like, okay, when we're really like needing to transform like inside out, like it has to come from this, or maybe not has to, but it comes often from this space of processing in a level 5, 6, which is, I think, pretty cool.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And traditional talk therapy, um, I think of the talk as it's like being with the symbols
Yeah.
and not enough with the process, right? And um, sometimes I think about light, how light,
Mm.
they'll talk about it like a particle in a wave.
Hmm.
And it's like with focusing, we go to the wave place, right? We go to the process place. We go where there's just sensation. We go beyond words.
Yeah.
Really, we go beyond symbolization. Because we go beyond symbolization, we can find something new and fresh.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it symbolizes, and then you have that carrying forward. And you're
Exactly. It's that kind of
by
dip in,
choice.
dip out, right? Like, yeah. And I think that the carrying forward, the freshness also came through in some of the qualitative responses where also people spoke to this idea of like, okay, I have something that like this something stuck or something stopped, and then I can get a fresh perspective or I can kind of find out something new. So yeah, it does feel like a kind of like a dip in, dip out, and I think that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Cool.
then the last cool thing that I just this was I think maybe my favorite finding if I had to qualify them, but this uh um I mean, okay, sorry, I'll backtrack. Basically, our participants had a lot of different experience. So we had participants from 2 months of experience to 37 years of experience. I think the average was about 10 years of focusing experience. So a pretty experienced sample. But we were interested in looking at the group differences relative to how long people had practiced focusing. And we found that group differences were only apparent in individuals who had focused for 1 year or less. So it didn't really matter if you were focusing for 2 years or 37 years, kind of that 1 year mark is where we really saw changes. And individuals who had practiced for 1 year or more demonstrated higher focusing attitude, greater interoception, lower alexithymia. But I think what's really neat about it is that it's like once when I mean in the study we write kind of once you know, and it's kind of become like a little shorthand for us. But I think that's just so beautiful, right? Like because even with something like mindfulness, it's like to kind of get to like those real like experts. It's like there's still positive effects that we see if folks practice mindfulness for just 5 minutes a day or whatever. But it's like once you have this skill, once you have the capacity to kind of dip in and dip out, like we were saying, it's like you have it. That's it.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really, really amazing.
Yeah. I love that. And I often say to people, we're going to relearn how to do this because we were socialized out of it. It's right. Gendlin says he didn't create focusing. He said he
Yes.
discovered it. He just put steps to something he saw people doing in the research.
Yeah.
And so in some ways it makes sense that after about a year, you're like, oh yeah, I remember how to do this. And I've allowed myself to feel again and to go back to that. And
Yeah. And it becomes a habit. It becomes something that people just do. They just check in with how they're feeling. And if there is a felt sense or something stuck, then they'll continue with the process, right? So I think it's a real gift to be able to communicate with ourselves in this way and with others. Yeah,
yeah, and it takes a little bit of training
it sure does. And some,
or some time.
capacities, the
Yeah.
time and I think that's kind of another, I think knowing what these capacities are gives us opportunity for future like guidelines or training programs to kind of tailor things a little bit more. Like if a person is having particular difficulty with that interception piece of like actually feeling the felt sense, they might be like, no, I'm waiting, I'm welcoming, but they're like, I just don't feel anything, right? So you might even query and check in like, what is it like when you feel hunger? What is that for you? And kind of, maybe body scans could be kind of an entryway into just noticing parts of the body. Um, yeah, things like that.
So what's next?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think I mentioned a couple of times that this was really a pilot study because we were
Right.
trying to kind of sense um, uh, how to fit this into the research context. And so my dissertation study is looking at actually teaching focusing to beginners. So we're running groups and looking at how people engage with learning focusing, and also how these different facets of focusing, attitude, interception, symbolization, how they might develop over time. So how people experience, but then the outcomes, and potentially hopefully mapping out some of the trajectories. So folks are coming in with low focusing attitude, interception, or whatever. Like, are these things actually changing over the course of a training, and how? And yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, so the
wonderful.
kind of mechanisms of change and movements and things like that.
Yeah. And what are
Mhm.
the timelines for
Yeah, so
results?
we're
Sounds
we're
interesting.
running. Yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh. No, so we're running the groups now. So yeah, we'll see it. We'll see. Keep your eyes out, couple years probably for sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah, take a
yeah.
while.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's about it. So keep an eye out. And if anyone has any questions or things that I missed, yeah, feel free to send them my way.
Okay. Yeah, so you're okay. We'll share your email in
Yeah.
the in the notes
Yeah.
in the description. And yeah, I thank you so much, Lola, for taking the time to share with us and to give us a glimpse into the paper, which we'll also put a link to so people
Yeah.
can get it if they
Awesome.
want. And yeah, we look forward to in a few years' time hearing the next phase of the research.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Awesome. It's been a real pleasure. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.